German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer has influenced so many people across a whole range of disciplines, from a philosopher like Friedrich Nietzsche to a psychoanalyst like Sigmund Freud, and then even Einstein or Carl Jung. He's had such a profound impact on philosophy and, in fact, on the world itself. In this podcast, I'm not going to talk about his works, that I'll do at some point later. Right now, I'm going to read from one of his essays. His essays are brilliant, by the way. This one is on authorship, and it's been taken from the collection of his essays. So here we go. There are, first of all, two kinds of authors: those who write for the subject's sake and those who write for writing's sake. While the one have had thoughts or experiences which seem to them worth communicating, the others want money, and so they write for money. Their thinking is part of the business of writing. They may be recognized by the way in which they spin out their thoughts to the greatest possible length. Then, too, by the very nature of their thoughts, which are only half true, perverse, forced, vacillating. Again, by the aversion they generally show to saying anything straight out so that they may seem other than they are. Hence, their writing is deficient in clearness and definiteness. And it is not long before they betray that their only object in writing at all is to cover paper. This sometimes happens with the best authors. Now and then, for example, with Lessing in his dramaturgy, and even in many of Jean-Paul's romances. As soon as the reader perceives this, let him throw the book away, for time is precious. The truth is that when an author begins to write for the sake of covering paper, he's cheating the reader, because he writes under the pretext that he has something to say. Writing for money and reservation of copyright are, at bottom, the ruin of literature. No one writes anything that is worth writing, unless he writes entirely for the sake of his subject. What an inestimable boon it would be if in every branch of literature there were only a few books, but those excellent. This can never happen as long as money is to be made by writing. It seems as though the money lay under a curse, for every author degenerates as soon as he begins to put pen to paper in any way for the sake of gain. The best works of the greatest men all come from the time when they had to write for nothing or for very little. And here too, that Spanish proverb holds good, which declares that honor and money are not to be found in the same purse. The reason why literature is in such a bad plight nowadays is simply and solely that people write books to make money. A man who is in want sits down and writes a book, and the public is stupid enough to buy it. The secondary effect of this is the ruin of language. A great many bad writers make their whole living by that foolish mania of the public for reading nothing but what has just been printed. Journalists, I mean. Truly a most appropriate name. In plain language, it is journeymen, day laborers. Again, it may be said that there are three kinds of authors. First come those who write without thinking. They write from a full memory, from reminiscences, it may be even straight out of other people's books. This class is the most numerous. Then come those who do their thinking whilst they are writing. They think in order to write, and there is no lack of them. Last of all, come those authors who think before they begin to write. They are rare. Authors of the second class who put off their thinking until they come to write are like a sportsman who goes forth at random and is not likely to bring very much home. On the other hand, when an author of the third or rare class writes, it is like a bachio. Here, the game has been previously captured and shut up within a very small space, from which it is afterwards let out, so many at a time, into another space also confined. The game cannot possibly escape the sportsman. He has nothing to do but aim and fire. In other words, write down his thoughts. There is a kind of sport from which a man has something to show. But even though the number of those who really think seriously before they begin to write is small, extremely few of them think about the subject itself. The remainder think only about the books that have been written on the subject and what has been said by the others. In order to think at all, such writers need the more direct and powerful stimulus of having other people's thoughts before them. These become their immediate theme, and the result is that they are always under their influence, and so never, in any real sense of the word, are original. But the former are roused to thought by the subject itself, to which their thinking is thus immediately directed. This is the only class that produces writers of abiding fame. It must, of course, be understood that I am speaking here of writers who treat of great subjects, not of writers on the art of making brandy. Unless an author takes the material on which he writes out of his own head, that is to say, from his own observation, he is not worth reading. Book manufacturers, compilers, the common run of history writers, and many others of the same class take their material immediately out of books, and the material goes straight to their fingertips without even paying freight or undergoing examination as it passes through their heads, to say nothing of elaboration or revision. How very learned many a man would be if he knew everything that was in his own books. The consequence of this is that these writers talk in such a loose and vague manner that the reader puzzles his brain in vain to understand what it is of which they are really thinking. They are thinking of nothing. It may now and then be the case that the book from which they copy has been composed exactly in the same way, so that writing of this sort is like a plaster cast of a cast. And in the end, the bare outline of the face, and that too hardly recognizable, is all that is left to your Antinous. Let compilations be read as seldom as possible. It is difficult to avoid them altogether, since compilations also include those textbooks which contain in a small space the accumulated knowledge of centuries. There is no greater mistake than to suppose that the last work is always the more correct, that what is written later on is in every case an improvement on what was written before, and that change always means progress. Real thinkers, men of right judgment, people who are in earnest with their subject, these are all exceptions only. Vermin is the rule everywhere in the world. It is always on the alert, taking the mature opinions of the thinkers and industriously seeking to improve upon them in its own peculiar way. If the reader wishes to study any subject, let him beware of rushing to the newest books upon it, and confining his attention to them alone, under the notion that science is always advancing and that the old books have been drawn upon in the writing of the new. They have been drawn upon, it is true, but how? The writer of the new book often does not understand the old books thoroughly, and yet he is unwilling to take their exact words. So he bungles them and says in his own bad way that which has been said very much better and more clearly by the old writers who wrote from their own lively knowledge of the subject. The new writer frequently omits the best things they say, their most striking illustrations, their happiest remarks, because he does not see their value or feel how pregnant they are. The only thing that appeals to him is what is shallow and insipid. It often happens that an old and excellent book is ousted by new and bad ones, which, written for money, appear with an air of great pretension and much puffing on the part of friends. In science, a man tries to make his mark by bringing out something fresh. This often means nothing more than that he attacks some received theory which is quite correct in order to make room for his own false notions. Sometimes the effort is successful for a time, and then a return is made to the old and true theory. These innovators are serious about nothing but their own precious self. It is this that they want to put forward, and the quick way of doing so, as they think, is to start a paradox. Their sterile heads take naturally to the path of negation. So they begin to deny truths that have long been admitted: the vital power, for example, the sympathetic nervous system, Bichat's distinction between the working of the passions and the working of intelligence, or else they want us to return to crass atomism and the like. Hence, it frequently happens that the course of science is retrogressive. To this class of writers belong those translators who not only translate their author but also correct and revise him, a proceeding which always seems to me impertinent. To such writers I say, write books yourself which are worth translating, and leave other people's works as they are. The reader should study, if he can, the real authors, the men who have founded and discovered things, or at any rate those who are recognized as the great masters in every branch of knowledge. Let him buy second-hand books rather than read their contents in new ones. To be sure, it is easy to add to any new discovery, and therefore the student, after well mastering the rudiments of his subject, will have to make himself acquainted with the more recent additions to the knowledge of it. And in general, the following rule may be laid down here as elsewhere. If a thing is new, it is seldom good, because if it is good, it is only for a short time new. What the address is to a letter, the title should be to a book. In other words, its main object should be to bring the book to those amongst the public who will take an interest in its contents. It should therefore be expressive, and since by its very nature it must be short, it must be concise, laconic, pregnant, and if possible, give the contents in one word. A prolix title is bad, and so is one that says nothing, or is obscure and ambiguous, or even it may be false and misleading. This last may possibly involve the book in the same fate as overtakes a wrongly addressed letter. The worst titles of all are those which have been stolen. Those, I mean, which have already been borne by other books. For they are in the first place a plagiarism, and secondly, the most convincing proof of a total lack of originality in the author. A man who has not enough originality to invent a new title for his book will be still less able to give it new contents. Akin to those stolen titles are those which have been imitated, that is to say, stolen to the extent of one half. For instance, long after I had produced my treatise on Will in Nature, Oersted wrote a book entitled On Mind in Nature. A book can never be anything more than the impress of its author's thoughts. And the value of these will lie either in the matter about which he has thought or in the form which his thoughts take. In other words, what it is that he has thought about it. The matter of books is most various, and various also are the several excellences attaching to books on the score of their matter. By matter, I mean everything that comes within the domain of actual experience, that is to say, the facts of history and the facts of nature, taken in and by themselves and in their widest sense. Here it is the thing treated of, which gives its peculiar character to the book, so that a book can be important, whoever it was that wrote it. But in regard to the form, the peculiar character of a book depends on the person who wrote it. It may treat of matters which are accessible to everyone and well known, but it is the way in which they are treated, what it is that is thought about them, that gives the book its value, and this comes from its author. If then, from this point of view, a book is excellent and beyond comparison, so is its author. It follows that if a writer is worth reading, his merit rises just in proportion as he owes little to his master. Therefore, the better known and the more hackneyed this is, the greater he will be. The three great tragedians of Greece, for example, all worked at the same subject matter. So when a book is celebrated, care should be taken to note whether it is on account of its matter or its form, and a distinction should be made accordingly. Books of great importance on account of their matter may proceed from very ordinary and shallow people by the fact that they alone have had access to this matter. Books, for instance, which describe journeys in distant lands, rare natural phenomenon, or experiments or historical occurrences of which the writers were witnesses, or in connection with which they have spent much time and trouble in the research and special study of original documents. On the other hand, where the material is accessible to everyone or very well known, everything will depend upon the form, and what it is that is thought about the matter will give the book all the value it possesses. Here only a really distinguished man will be able to produce anything worth reading, for the others will think nothing but what anyone else can think. They will just produce an impress of their own minds, but this is a print of which everyone possesses the original.